Imagine you are on an expedition cruise, navigating remote waters. You are surrounded by nature and comfort. But then, an announcement crackles over the speakers. A medical emergency. A strict quarantine protocol is initiated. Suddenly, the vessel becomes a floating isolation zone. Reports suggest a suspected outbreak, specifically of the Andes virus. As documented by the CDC, this is a unique hantavirus strain capable of person-to-person transmission. What happens next isn't just determined by the complex logistics of a medical evacuation or international response. It is largely determined by a hidden, primitive architecture in your brain. When extreme scenarios shatter our illusion of safety, most people default to what our ancestors did millions of years ago. They freeze or panic. In the face of profound uncertainty, many begin consuming unverified rumors, overwhelming both their own nervous systems and the ship's crew. This psychological distress triggers biological responses, spiking cortisol levels which, over time, can actively suppress the body's physical resilience. But a small group, the elite 10%, responds differently. They navigate crises not by chance, but by intuitively overriding their brain's default settings. Today, we analyze the exact structural difference between those who succumb to cognitive paralysis and those who master the crisis. This is the psychology of survival. To understand why people fail to act in emergencies, we must look at the research of survival psychologist Dr. John Leach. After analyzing human behavior in extreme environments, Leach identified a consistent neurological pattern, the 10-80-10 rule. The 10%, the resilient. These individuals manage to retain their brain's executive function. They can process new, terrifying information, assess their environment, and take purposeful action. They possess superior metacognition, the ability to observe their fear without letting it hijack their logic. The 80%, the frozen. This is the vast majority. When a sudden crisis hits, they don't necessarily scream, they turn to stone. As highlighted in scholarly reviews of Leach's work, this survival stupor is a literal cognitive failure. The brain's working memory becomes so overloaded by the sudden threat that goal-directed behavior shuts down. The bottom 10%, the chaos. These individuals exhibit highly counterproductive behavior. Overwhelmed by anxiety, their emotional brain completely bypasses the rational cortex. Their panic drives them to break safety protocols, jeopardizing their own well-being and actively straining limited emergency resources. The critical question is, what is the logical mechanism that prevents the brain's executive function from crashing, allowing a person to move into the top 10%? We don't have to guess how the human mind reacts to shipboard quarantines. Public health and psychiatric observations from past global health crises provide profound insights. Research into confined, high-stress environments reveals a definitive trend. The individuals who successfully protected their psychological well-being shared one non-negotiable trait: the strict maintenance of routine. While those succumbing to anxiety consumed a relentless stream of terrifying news, highly resilient individuals actively structured their days. They established a non-negotiable wake-up time. They engaged in permitted physical activity inside their cabins. Crucially, they limited their news intake to official updates from organizations like the WHO, ECDC, or the CDC. Why does this matter? It is pure biology. Prolonged uncertainty keeps the body in a state of hyperarousal. Chronically elevated cortisol negatively impacts sleep, metabolic function, and immune response. By imposing a predictable routine, these passengers essentially tricked their nervous systems into feeling safe. In a chaotic crisis, routine is a biological shield. How do you endure an isolation period when you don't know when a medical evacuation will be completed? This brings us to a psychological framework every rational thinker must master: The Stockdale Paradox. Admiral James Stockdale was a prisoner of war for over 7 years. He observed a deadly psychological trend among his peers. The extreme optimists, the ones who falsely convinced themselves, "We'll be out by Christmas," suffered the most. When their artificial deadlines repeatedly passed, the psychological blow was devastating. As behavioral models suggest, repeated severe disappointment can lead to give-up-itis, a state of fatal psychogenic apathy. The true survivors were those who retained an absolute, unwavering faith that they would prevail in the end, while simultaneously confronting the most brutal, immediate facts of their current reality. On an isolated ship, the naive optimist says, "They will evacuate us tomorrow." When the logistics fail, their mind breaks. The rational survivor says, "This evacuation might take weeks. It will be miserable, but I will follow the health protocols, manage my daily habits, and I will get through this." This is structural realism. If you find yourself facing a sudden systemic crisis or isolation, here is the cognitive protocol used by the top 10% to protect their executive function. 1. Information hygiene. Stop the endless scrolling. Rely strictly on verified communications from medical or government authorities. Consuming rumor-based media keeps your amygdala firing, accelerating cognitive fatigue. 2. Externalize your working memory. Write down a daily plan. Because working memory capacity plummets during high stress, the mechanism behind the 80% freeze, having a physical list of simple tasks offloads the burden from your brain. 3. Active metacognition. When you feel panic rising, label it biologically. Instead of saying, "I am terrified," tell yourself, "My body is currently experiencing an adrenaline spike." This linguistic shift distances you from the emotion, allowing your rational cortex to regain control. Pathogens and environmental disasters are entirely indifferent to human emotion. However, the architecture of your psychological response dictates your reality. You can be part of the 80% immobilized by cognitive overload, or part of the mindful 10% who impose order onto chaos. Survival isn't about physical strength. The choice, as always, begins with a single, rational shift in the mind.